In the early hours of the 14th of October 1939, and in the calm waters of Scapa Flow, sits the Superdreadnought Battleship HMS Royal Oak. She was a veteran of World War I and fought courageously at Jutland, but is now one of the senior ships of the home fleet. On board is over 1,000 crew, including over 100 boy sailors. The quiet Scottish night, however, is about to be shattered by a hidden attacker, with catastrophic consequence. In the 1910s, the Royal Navy called for a new class of Superdreadnought battleships. They were designed to be more heavily protected than the 5 Superdreadnoughts of the Queen Elizabeth class that preceded, but they were also slower and slightly smaller. These ships were the Revenge class, although they were sometimes referred to as the Royal Sovereign class. The class was initially to be made up of 8 ships, but ultimately concluded with the 5 ships of HMS Revenge, HMS Resolution, HMS Ramillies, HMS Royal Sovereign and HMS Royal Oak. To save on cost, they were originally designed to run on both coal and oil-fired boilers. However, during their construction, First Sea Lord Jackie Fisher ordered that they be redesigned to use oil-fired boilers only. This would ultimately give them an increase in power of some 9,000 shaft horsepower over the original design. On the 15th of January 1914, the keel of HMS Royal Oak was laid down at Devonport Royal Dockyard, and 10 months later, on the 17th of November 1914, she was launched as the 8th ship to carry the name Royal Oak. After her fitting out, she was commissioned into service with the Royal Navy on the 1st of May 1916. She had an overall length of 620 feet 7 inches, a beam of 88 feet 6 inches and a deep draft of 33 feet 7 inches. Her displacement was 28,240 tonnes, and at deep load she displaced 31,630 tonnes. 18 Yarrow boilers provided steam for 2 sets of Parsons steam turbines, with each set driving 2 shafts to a power rating of 40,000 shaft horsepower. This was intended to give a design top speed of 23 knots, although on her sea trials she fell short with a top speed of 22 knots. This gave her a range of 7,000 nautical miles when at a cruising speed of 10 knots. Along with the rest of her Revenge-class sisters, she was equipped with 8 breech-loading 15-inch Mark I guns, mounted in 4 twin-gun turrets in 2 super-firing pairs, and designated A, B, X and Y turrets. Mounted in casemates along the broadside and amidships were 12 breech-loading 6-inch Mark XII guns, with a further 2 mounted on the shelter deck. 2 quick-firing 3-inch 20 hundredweight Mark I guns made up her anti-aircraft armament, and she was also fitted with 4 submerged 21-inch torpedo tubes. She was protected by a waterline belt of Krupp cemented armour, of 13 inches thick, running between A turret and Y turret, and reduced to 4 inches towards the bow and stern. And above this was a 6-inch thick strake of armour running between A and X turrets. The turrets themselves protected by up to 13 inches of armour. Transverse bulkheads with armour ranging between 4 and 6 inches ran between A and Y turrets, and she also had multiple armoured decks ranging from 1 to 4 inches of thickness. Upon entrance service in the 1st of May 1916, she came under command of Captain Crawford McLachlan and was assigned to the 3rd Division of the 4th Battle Squadron of the Grand Fleet. And only 1 month into her naval service, she was involved in serious action. In late May, British naval intelligence had intercepted and decrypted plans for a significant German high seas fleet sortie. The interception detailed plans to sail 16 dreadnoughts, 6 pre-dreadnoughts, 6 light cruisers and 31 torpedo boats out of the Jade Bight and into the North Sea and head for the waters off Jutland on the morning of the 31st of May 1916, under the command of Admiral Reinhard Scheer. The intention was to lure out several ships of the British Grand Fleet, engage and destroy them. To act as bait, 5 battle cruisers, supporting cruisers and torpedo boats under the command of Rear Admiral Franz von Hipper would be used to lure out the British fleet directly into the path of the High Seas Fleet. Now the British had learned of these plans, The Admiralty gave orders to the commander of the Grand Fleet, Admiral John Jellicoe, to dispatch 28 dreadnoughts and 9 battlecruisers the night before the Germans would set sail, with the intention of intercepting the High Seas Fleet and destroy them. The first contact was shortly before 2:30 the following afternoon, when ships of the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron, which were part of the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron under the command of Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty, opened fire on some German torpedo boats. The initial action would be mainly between British and German battlecruiser formations, but by 6 p.m, Jellicoe and his dreadnoughts of the Grand Fleet, including Royal Oak, had arrived, and within 15 minutes of their arrival, they began firing. An early casualty of British gunfire was the German light cruiser HMS Wiesbaden, which had become disabled. Nearby German ships rushed to her aid, whilst at the same time the British were bombarding the area in an attempt to sink the stricken light cruiser. At 6:29 p.m, Royal Oak opened up her main guns with 4 salvos, followed by follow-up fire from her secondary guns. She scored a direct hit on Wiesbaden's aft, but drew the attention of nearby German ships, who immediately targeted Royal Oak, but were unsuccessful in causing any damage to her. And at 7 p.m, a flotilla of German torpedo boats arrived to assist Wiesbaden, and spotters on Royal Oak, fearing they were about to come under a torpedo attack, turned their secondary guns in their direction. And by 7:15, the gunners aboard Royal Oak could see the main German battlecruiser squadron coming into view, and at the head of the formation was battlecruiser SMS Der Flinge, and she was immediately the target for Royal Oak's main guns. The initial salvos were unsuccessful, but at 7:20 p.m, she scored a pair of hits on Der Flinge's aft. The wounded battlecruiser now made use of the smoke and haze and vanished from Royal Oak's view, who instead turned her attention on the nearby battlecruiser SMS Seydlitz, scoring a hit before again losing her target to the mist. The action for Royal Oak and the Grand Fleet was now over, as the confusion of the exact location of the High Seas Fleet was unknown, and so Jellicoe could not direct his fleet onto targets, and so they reformed into a nighttime cruising formation. Royal Oak's first engagement of the war had resulted in 38 main gun shells being fired, along with 84 from her secondary. On the 5th of November 1918, she was in the Firth of Forth and anchored off Burnt Island. Alongside her was the light battlecruiser HMS Glorious and the seaplane tender HMS Campania. Suddenly, a force 10 squall caused Campania to drag her anchor and head straight for Royal Oak and collided with her. Following this collision, she also headed for Glorious and collided again. The damage to Glorious and Royal Oak was minor, however Campania, a converted ocean liner, was not so fortunate. The initial collision with Royal Oak had punctured her hull, and her engine room was flooding. As she filled with water, she settled back onto her stern, and 5 hours later, she was on the sea floor of the Firth of Forth. The final World War I duty for Royal Oak was to take part in the escort of a large part of the High Seas Fleet for internment at Scapa Flow. The immediate post-war years saw Royal Oak substantially refitted. In 1918, the roofs of her B and X turrets were fitted with flying-off platforms. This would enable her to launch either fighters or reconnaissance aircraft. And between 1922 and 1924, she had her anti-aircraft armament upgraded, with the original 3-inch anti-aircraft guns replaced with a pair of quick-firing 4-inch Mark V guns, as well as improving her rangefinders. Perhaps most significantly at this time, she was retrofitted with anti-torpedo bulges. These were partially water-filled compartmentalised sponsons on either side of the ship, and had the intention of detonating an incoming torpedo, absorb the explosion, and contain any flooding. They came at a cost though, as this increased her beam to 102 feet 1 inch, and reduced her draft to 29 feet 6 inches, although was still able to reach a speed of 21.75 knots. A further refit in 1927 would add an additional 2 4-inch anti-aircraft guns, following the removal of the shelter deck 6-inch guns. Following these modifications, Royal Oak found herself based in Grand Harbour, Malta, as part of the Mediterranean Fleet. And it was while serving here that a notorious incident occurred involving some of her senior officers that became known as the Royal Oak Mutiny. During a dance held in the ship's wardroom, a disagreement came about between Rear Admiral Bernard Collard and the 2 Royal Oak senior officers, Captain Kenneth Dewar and Commander Henry Daniel. What began as a simple dispute would fester and deteriorate over several months between these officers. Captain Dewar and Commander Daniel began accusing Rear Admiral Collard of openly humiliating and insulting them in front of the ship's crew, and of vindictive fault-finding. In return, Collard charged Dewar and Daniel with failing to obey orders, and not offering the respect to which his rank deserved, alleging that they treated him worse than a midshipman. Ultimately, Captain Dewar and Commander Daniel submitted letters of complaint to Collard's superior, Vice Admiral John Kelly, who in turn passed them up the chain of command to Admiral Sir Roger Keyes. Things were escalating rapidly. Admiral Keyes, realising that there was now a breakdown in the relationship between the two senior officers and their flag admiral, hastily convened a board of inquiry, following which all three men were removed from their posts and returned to England. Things became worse, because the very day after the board of inquiry sat, there was planned to be the beginning of a major naval exercise. The removal of these officers, and subsequently the participation of Royal Oak, Vice Admiral Keyes had no choice but to postpone the exercise. The rumour mills then went into overdrive, with wild speculation that Royal Oak had actually experienced a mutiny. The press got hold of this rumour, and of course duly spread that rumour far and wide. So far and wide that it actually came to the attention of King George V, who immediately summoned First Lord of the Admiralty William Bridgeman for a thorough explanation. A subsequent court-martial was held in Gibraltar, where Dewar and Daniel were found guilty of writing subversive documents with their letters of complaint. They were severely reprimanded, with Daniel resigning from the Royal Navy. Dewar remained in service, but was restricted to a series of minor commands. Rear Admiral Collard didn't escape either, and he was heavily criticised for his conduct by Parliament, such that William Bridgeman denounced him as unfit to hold further high command, and he was forcibly retired from the Navy. Following this unfortunate series of events, HMS Royal Oak was returned for a further refit between 1934 and 1936. To increase protection, her deck armour was increased to 5 inches over the magazines, and over the engine rooms it was increased to 3.5 inches. Her anti-aircraft defences were upgraded substantially by replacing her single mount guns with twin-mounted quick-firing 4-inch Mark 16 guns, as well as a pair of octuple-mounted 2-pounder Mark 8 pom-poms. Also, a pair of Vickers .50 calibre machine guns were added to the conning tower. For this new armament, new fire control directors were installed, including rebuilding the main mast as a tripod to support the weight of a radio direction finding station. Finally, the forward pair of submerged torpedo tubes were replaced with 4 21-inch above-water tubes, just forward of the A turret. February 2, 1937, HMS Royal Oak is sailing 30 nautical miles east of Gibraltar. She is carrying out a non-intervention patrol around the Iberian Peninsula during the Spanish Civil War. During this patrol, she came under attack by bombers of the Spanish Republican forces. 3 bombs were dropped, of which 2 exploded approximately 500 metres off Royal Oak's starboard bow. No damage or casualties were reported, however the British authorities protested to the Republican government, who later apologised for the error. Just 3 weeks later, however, on the 23rd of February, she did not escape as lightly. During a bombardment by nationalist forces, she was inadvertently struck by an anti-aircraft shell fired from a Republican position. 5 men, including Captain Thomas Bernard Drew, were injured. In 1938, Royal Oak was awarded the status of flagship of the 2nd Battle Squadron of the Home Fleet, based out of Portsmouth. And during the summer of 1939, she was undertaking training in the English Channel to prepare for a 30-month tour of the Mediterranean. However, with the prospect of war looming, she was instead sent north to Scapa Flow. In October of 1939, the German heavy cruisers Deutschland and Admiral Graf Spee were at sea conducting commerce-raiding operations. The German battleship Gneisenau had been ordered out into the North Sea to provide a diversion for the heavy cruisers. The British sent out a search party that included Royal Oak to seek out and destroy Gneisenau. The search was not a success, and Gneisenau remained elusive, but this sortie unfortunately highlighted shortcomings in the now ageing Royal Oak, who could barely make 20 knots and was unable to keep up with the main fleet. Following her return to Scapa Flow, it was also evident that she struggled to withstand the harsh conditions and received minor damage. She was now sadly showing her obsolescence. Scapa Flow had long been an ideal natural harbour for the British fleet. Located off the north coast of Scotland in the centre of the Orkney Islands, it was large enough to accommodate the entire Grand Fleet during World War I, and as it was surrounded by a ring of islands, it had been thought of as impregnable to U-boat attack. This was, however, proven to be untrue, as U-boats had shown to still be a threat, despite several countermeasures being put in place, such as floating booms and sunken block ships. The interwar years had seen the British Grand Fleet move south to Rosyth in the Firth of Forth, but with the advent of World War II, the British Home Fleet was moved back to Scapa Flow, which was now having its defences strengthened. At this time, to many of Germany's naval commanders, the memory of Scapa Flow and the scuttling of the High Seas Fleet at the end of World War I was still raw. One particular commander was Kriegsmarine Commander of Submarines Karl Dönitz. He had come up with a plan to attack Scapa Flow using a U-boat in the early days of the war. He had two main objectives. The first was to exact a sense of vengeance following the scuttling of the High Seas Fleet. And secondly, and more strategically, he wanted to draw out the Home Fleet from their refuge, causing them to disperse to other ports around the UK. This would make the Allied North Sea blockade far less effective. For the mission, he personally selected Captain Lieutenant Gunther Prien, and set a date of the night of the 13th and 14th of October 1939. Prior to the attack, a German reconnaissance flight had overflown Scapa Flow and taken some high-quality photographs to assist the U-boat commander. Whilst the reconnaissance flight was of help to Prien, it also alerted the Admiral of the Home Fleet, Charles Forbes, who, now fearing an aerial attack, ordered the majority of the fleet out to sea to disperse. Royal Oak remained behind with 1,234 sailors on board, of which 163 were boy seamen, aged between 15 and 17 years old. Shortly after midnight, U-boat U-47 with Gunther Prien at the helm was approaching Scapa Flow from the east. The route took him to the north of Lamholm, just off the mainland, where he then turned southwest, and after successfully avoiding two sunken block ships, he entered the main harbour at 27 minutes past midnight. To his dismay, the view that met him did not match the photographs of numerous ships of the Home Fleet following Forbes' order to disperse a good deal of the larger ships. Prien travelled for several kilometres in the southwesterly direction in search of targets, before a full about turn and headed northeast back towards the shore. Had he remained on his initial course, he would have soon come across the newly commissioned light cruiser HMS Belfast, which was anchored just 8 kilometres from where he turned around. As the U-boat headed back towards the shore, a lookout spotted a large ship off to the north, with the second positioned just behind. This ship was correctly identified as a Revenge-class battleship, HMS Royal Oak. The other ship was misidentified as a Renown-class battlecruiser HMS Repulse, where in fact it was the World War I seaplane tender HMS Pegasus. Also tied up alongside Royal Oak's portside was the tender HMS Daisy II. At 58 minutes past midnight, Prien took his first opportunity and released a salvo of 3 torpedoes from U-47's bow tubes. He had fired slightly in front of Royal Oak, and 2 torpedoes passed in front of her, but a third struck her bow and detonated. The battleship shook violently, resulting in the waking of her crew, and as the noise of the explosion settled, a loud rattling sound could be heard as Royal Oak's starboard anchor chain had been severed and was rattling down through the slips. At this point, there didn't seem to be much damage, and no further explosions were heard. There was certainly no sound of aircraft in the area, and so the thought of being under attack was not considered. Instead, it had been assumed that there had been an explosion in the inflammable store located in the ship's bow. A damage control party was sent to investigate, as many of the crew returned to their hammocks. U-47 had now turned about and was sailing away from Royal Oak, and she released a single torpedo from her stern tube. This failed to reach Royal Oak. Undeterred, Prien again ordered U-47 to turn about and headed straight back to Royal Oak, and again fired 3 torpedoes from the bow tubes. At 16 minutes past 1, 3 enormous explosions in quick succession struck Royal Oak amidships. The skipper of tender Daisy II, John Gatt, reported an explosion that reached the height of Royal Oak's masthead. A huge hole was blown through the armoured deck, and the stokers, boys and marines' messes were destroyed. As the ship lost electrical power, cordite from a magazine ignited and sent a huge fireball throughout the ship's interior. The mortally wounded battleship now began to roll over to starboard, quickly settling at an initial list of 15 degrees. The tender Daisy 2, still tied to Royal Oak's port side, was beginning to lift up out of the water, lodged against the side of Royal Oak's anti-torpedo bulge. So skipper John Gatt ordered the tender to be cut free. The listing of Royal Oak now meant that water was pressing against the starboard portholes, forcing them open and allowing water to rush in. She continued to roll until settling at 45 degrees, where she remained for some time. At 29 minutes past 1, only 13 minutes after Prien's second fatal strike, HMS Royal Oak slipped beneath the surface, with many crew still on board. A desperate fight for survival was now on for the hundreds that had managed to escape the sinking battleship. Many of the men and boys in the water were dressed in little more than nightclothes and totally unprepared for the frigid Scottish waters. As they attempted to swim to safety, the thick layer of fuel oil on the surface of the water filled their lungs and stomachs. The shoreline was 800 metres away, and only a handful would make that distance. John Gatt on Daisy 2, using his searchlights, was able to rescue 386 men from the water, and this included Royal Oak's captain William Benn. Daisy 2, being just a small tender, could not accommodate this number of men, and so the following couple of hours was spent transferring the survivors to nearby HMS Pegasus, as well as other boats that had come to join the rescue effort. John Gatt was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his efforts in saving the majority of survivors from Royal Oak. The total number pulled from the water from a crew of 1,234 was just 424. In total, 835 crew lost their lives, with some succumbing to their injuries in the days that followed. Included in the dead was the commander of the 2nd Battle Squadron, Rear Admiral Henry Blagrove. There was a large contingent of boy seamen on board Royal Oak that night, not yet 18 years old, and of the 163 boys, 134 were killed. This was the largest loss of this kind ever in a single event for the Royal Navy. U-47 had managed to make a successful escape from Scapa Flow and was returning to Germany when German listening services picked up the BBC broadcasts announcing the loss of Royal Oak. On the 17th of October, Gunther Prien and U-47 arrived in port at Wilhelmshaven to a hero's welcome, and the Nazi propaganda machine went into full swing, awarding Prien with the Iron Cross First Class and his crew the Iron Cross Second Class. Prien was further decorated when Hitler sent his personal plane to bring him and his crew to Berlin and awarded him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Meanwhile, while Germany was lauding its U-boat commander, in Britain the questions began as to how this could have happened. An Admiralty Board of Inquiry was held between the 18th and the 24th of October to establish how a U-boat could have entered Scapa Flow and deliver such an attack. The Home Fleet was immediately ordered to disperse to safer ports until such a time that the defences at Scapa Flow could be strengthened. First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, was called to Parliament to answer a series of questions as to why Royal Oak had so many boys aged 15 to 17 on board at the time of the attack, many of whom were killed. Although Churchill initially defended the long-standing tradition of sending boys to sea, the outcome was that this practice would cease, with under-18s only serving on active ships in exceptional circumstances. HMS Royal Oak lies on the sea floor at a depth of 25 metres, and as the majority of bodies were unable to be recovered, she is designated as a war grave, with all diving and other unauthorised explorations prohibited under the Protection of Military Remains Act 1986. At a ceremony each year, the loss of the Royal Oak is commemorated by Royal Navy divers, who placed a white ensign on his stern, and a memorial is in place at St Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall, Orkney, where a plaque is displayed in dedication to all those who lost their lives on HMS Royal Oak, above a book of remembrance listing their names. Thanks very much for watching. Please hit the like button and consider subscribing.